I'm here with, I've introduced you many times, so I'll do it again. My friend, a colleague, both professionally and academically, let's say, and a former roommate, former, counselor at times. So a little bit of everything. Farzad Yousefian is a brilliant sports scientist from Canada originally, he's got a good background in real theoretical science, molecular genetics. I think was your first master's degree, and then also an excellent background in practical and applied science and physiology. So he's done two master's degrees. One was in molecular genetics, and the other was I guess we can say performance analysis, right?
Sports physiology, yeah.
Sports physiology, applied physiology, and performance analysis, and now is a PhD candidate in Portugal, and the university is
University of the Beira Interior. It's in
the
middle.
All right,
yes.
Right on. So he's in Portugal now, so he's joining us. I guess it's the evening over there,
yeah.
And I would say the weather is better there than it is here, but it's not, because it's really nice and hot here too.
Exactly.
So we're all good. And Farzad and I, as I said, we've worked together in the amateur club environment here. We've worked at the professional level. We spent some time in Uruguay together. We've co-authored some papers and research studies that we've presented. I could say, I guess, all over the world, at least on two different continents that I can remember. And anyway, we're here to talk about today again what I think is a really fascinating topic, which is performance analysis, and specifically what can and cannot be measured, and how best to do that. So I guess, Farzad, if you want to maybe just give us a brief introduction of yourself, if there's anything I forgot or anything that I left out, and then we'll get into the topic.
No, first of all, thanks, Rich. It's always a pleasure speaking with you, and thanks to the NSCAC for the opportunity. I've done many of these discussions with you, and it's always been fascinating and a pleasure. And thanks for the participants who have come, and hopefully we'll get some more interactions and questions as we progress. Basically you hit it on the head, as well as my involvement with my company, Sports Performance Analytics. We're basically in the business of providing consultancy and performance analysis services to teams and clubs from the amateur to the professional level. And so people that are interested can visit our website. It's Sport Performance Analytics, inc.ca. Basically, performance analysis, the way I view the game is always from this physiology aspect of it, and how it can be integrated into the technical and tactical demands, because at the end of the day, it is a sport. It's a very multifaceted sport, football or soccer, but it is played by human beings, which essentially provides the physiological angle to it. But basically, my research over the past couple of years has been towards this integration of understanding the game from a physiological and technical tactical side. And that involves using performance analysis as a tool. But I think what's important for coaches to understand is not to shy away from performance analytics or performance analysis, because it's a very huge umbrella term. And I think what coaches have to understand is, in its most basic terms, performance analysis is literally to analyze performance and to monitor performance. And so this can be regarding physical attributes, which is the strength and conditioning expertise that you provided over the years and discussed, the technical aspects, the tactical aspects, the psychological, mental, and as well as the health and wellness. So performance analysis can come into affect into any of these essential branches. And what's also important is the level of analysis. Are you analyzing the player, two players, dyads, triads, positions, the team, the opposition, and then the level of analysis that you want? Is it quantitative? Is it qualitative? Is it longitudinal? Are we looking at over a season, many matches? Are we looking at one match? Are we looking at the opposition specifically, or a preseason or a tournament? Depends on what the coaches want. And what's very important to understand about performance analysis is that there's a plethora of metrics that are out there, and methods of analyzing any of these various aspects that I've mentioned. But the limiting factor, especially within Canada, with its very young but growing football culture and the pay-to-play system at the amateur level, essentially are the budget and the involvement of technology. So we're not talking about performance analysis methods used by Barcelona, but we're not talking about grassroots performance analysis, but we're talking about somewhere in the middle. And obviously the resources and the communication with the coaches and having this interaction as an analyst with the coach and having an open-minded coach to be open to this kind of insights. But at the end of the day, the whole application that coaches have to understand is that it is to improve team and player performance. Now, what's very interesting about performance analysis is that no matter what you do, at the end of the day, it's the match that dictates what is important or what the situations are. So if you are just collecting data for the sake of collecting data, you're wasting time. The most important thing about performance analysis is to be able to collect relevant data that's related to the match, that is reliable, and that is trainable. So to understanding situations and metrics that are, for example, applicable to the team in order to increase their performance in the match, and also to use the match as highlighting these critical moments that you need improvements on. So for example, if you want to increase high intensity running capacity, for example, well, that's great. There are several ways of measuring, for example, your endurance capacity. But what's more important is understanding where you fail in your physical attributes during a match, and then using those moments and the match situations in order to create the training sessions that reflect the match. And that's the difference between these advanced concepts of specific design or representative design in performance analysis and the basis for your training sessions, essentially.
All right. Well, thanks, Farzad. That was a good, thorough explanation and answer to the question, what is performance analysis? So that's great. Now, I'm going to try to paraphrase a little bit, and then we'll get into maybe one topic at a time, because there's a lot of interesting things you said. So I'll say, first of all, performance analysis, who does that? Who is it that does performance analysis? Well, coaches do it. Everybody does it. At its most basic level, of course, what it means to analyze performance is to watch and then, literally, form opinions, try to collect some kind of data, and try to come up with, to make sense of that data and come up with some actionable steps. So coaches, already do that. Fitness coaches, sports scientists do that too. I think you said something interesting when you're speaking sort of about, well, okay, on the high end, there's the professional clubs in Europe that have, that just have a lot of money. And of course, because they do that, they can invest a lot in human resources and staff, and they can invest a lot in, technology and everything. And then, on the totally opposite side of the spectrum, you've got, kind of beginner, maybe even grassroots, and where maybe analysis isn't so valuable. I know you and I, we've worked at the high levels, and not at the top yet, but hopefully one day. But we've done some work at the amateur level, in Canada, and at the higher levels, and often in both of those environments, there isn't always a lot of, there aren't always a lot of resources available for people, knowledgeable, experienced professionals that know really what they're doing, and there also isn't always a lot of resources available for technology. So we kind of work in there, and I know you've even with your business, and I want to be clear on the URL. Can you just say it again? I'll type it in the chat. It's
sportperformanceanalytics.ca.
Yeah, .ca. I wanted to make sure about analytics.ca. Sportperformanceanalytics.ca. Okay. So if you want to see more specifically about what Farzad is doing with his business, including some of the the technology he's working on developing right now, again, to fill that gap, which is the gap between the grassroots that don't really need analysis and the top pros that have unlimited resources. Everyone else is in the middle, and again, that's a lot of the work that we do. Okay, so that was an interesting point, and I guess maybe if we can start talking about, let's say, performance analysis. Again, you mentioned different categories, so maybe let's start with physical performance. And I know obviously it's maybe a little more my specialty, I guess, but you do a ton of work with that too. So what are the most important things? You did mention that, when we're analyzing performance, we really, we want to look at games, right? And we want to see how are players physically performing in games, and probably also in training, right? Yes. So what are the, so what are, like, talk to me about the most important physical abilities, physical capacities that you look for in training or games, and you want to try to, let's say, come up with real good, standardized, objective, valid, reliable ways of assessing and measuring the physical capacity of players.
For sure. I think what's important to distinguish here is that if we're, for example, watching a match, or we're interested in the physical capacity of a player, it's the training that requires us to improve that aspect of the player is different than if we want to increase the technical, tactical abilities of the player. So it's fantastic that we're just focusing on the physical. So in a match, the most important thing with respect to physical capacity is the onset of fatigue, and understanding when and how players become fatigued is critical in our understanding. And most of the recent research within the last 2 years is focused on trying to understand the worst case scenario, the most demanding periods of the match. And that's what some of my PhD is also based on. And basically we're looking at specific segments of the match. So the most demanding 1 minute period, 3 minute period, 5 minute period, for example. And understanding that the reason why this is important is because if I give you an idea of, like, for example, Rich, you run 10.5 kilometers in a match, 12% of that is high intensity running, or above 16 kilometers an hour. That doesn't really help me understand, well, what are the moments where you're most taxed, essentially, physically. And so by understanding and mapping out the most demanding moments of the game, we're then able to understand, okay, well, what happens up to that point and then after that point. And tons of research by Danish groups, by Italian groups, have shown that essentially, for example, in the 5 minute period of the most intense moment of the match in high intensity running, there is this significant drop in activity that's lower than the mean, which suggests that you're actually experiencing not only fatigue throughout the game, but the players are getting tired immediately after that 5 minute most intense period.
I want to just stop you there, just because I know, and I know you shared even some of your research, which is literally happening right now, looking into this, and this is, it's kind of it's a new, unique aspect to analyzing physical performance. These brief windows of time, whether it's 1 minute or 3 minutes. And so I got two questions about it. The first is, do all players sort of experience that fatigue in the same or around the same time in a match, or is it really, it's really dependent on the player, the team, the tactics? And then I guess second question, sorry, just you can answer them in order. But the second question is then, do you think that having a real good knowledge of, these periods of fatigue, when they occur and how they occur, can that then help to make training better and more effective? So
those are excellent questions, because so anyways, it's a very relatively new still concept, and there's a lot of problems with it. So for example, it's not just about high intensity running. If you watch the Euros, it's rare that a player essentially sprints for 5 minutes back and forth or in a straight line. So there are changes of direction that are involved, accelerations, decelerations, anaerobic capacity, extreme strength components to it. But it also is even more complicated because different positions experience it at different times in the match. For example, at the onset of the match, you have strikers experiencing that because they push all out. But for example, your center backs or your defensive line may experience that when defending a counterattack. So it is match specific. But the whole concept is towards understanding these specific moments, because we know players get fatigued throughout the match, but understanding their peak periods. So understanding the peak period allows us to figure out, okay, so what's my player's capacity? In this 5 minute peak period of Rich, he's running 560 meters of high intensity running. Okay, well then how long does it take for him to recover and to perform again at an average amount? So by understanding that relationship, we can then design training protocols that enhance your anaerobic capacity, your aerobic capacity, that allows you to not only increase your peak capacity, so going from 560 to 600 meters, for example, but your recovery after is a lot sooner, because what's reflected, you perform a lot of yo-yo intermittent recovery tests, which is an excellent way of assessing aerobic capacity, especially for the youth athletes that you have. Well, that's very important, because the higher your yo-yo score, for example, is a direct indication of your recovery or aerobic capacity. So by allowing players to train, for example, their high intensity running capacity and their aerobic capacity, we're able to not only shorten the amount of time that they experience fatigue in a match, but also enhance their recovery. And not only that, but this becomes, so why is this important? Well, this becomes important during critical moments of the match, based on their positions. Are they able to run back, for example, to defend? Are they able to then push forward in a counterattack in order to score? And I think for a lot of the coaches and the youth, I think these Euros have been fantastic in order to just observe the physical capacities of players. For example, the Swiss national team against France versus Turkey in the first match against Italy. The Turkish players were extremely fatigued by the 60th minute. Yeah. Italy was running, their fatigue was, so this affects their decision-making, their tactical decisions, their organization, everything collapses. But Italy kept going. Compare that with Switzerland's performance against the world champions, France. They kept going. They came back from a 3-1 deficit. And the runs that they make are a capacity, and their ability to recover is extremely important. So that all comes from having this understanding of physical capacity and performance analysis.
Right. So again, I'm always trying to paraphrase, because there's so much there, and I want to make sure I get
I'm
the
so
main
sorry.
concept. No, it's all good, man. So I think you spoke about something which I'm going to ask you about in a little bit, which is, of course, that when you answered my question, do all players experience this in the same way? And you said no, and I get that. I mean, obviously it's contextual, and that speaks to the fact that performance analysis, whether you want to look at the running a player does, whether you want to look at the passes they make, the interaction between players, the more context you have, meaning if you know what are the strategies and tactics the coach is trying to employ, are the players are they being successful, quote unquote, relative to the strategy and tactics? Because we all know there isn't always one correct decision that a player can make, and unless it's an open net, then there's one, but build up to getting a scoring or getting an open net, there's many. So context is really important. So I want to talk about that in a little bit, and I think your answer kind of spoke to that. And then the other thing, which again, like I've spent quite a lot of my research, but even my career, in my facility and everything, just obsessing over what's the best way to train to improve speed and recovery in between sprints. And so I think that, again, like, why is it so important to learn about these peak periods? Because when you know about them, then you can change training, and you can potentially make training a little bit more specific to what's actually happening in the game. So maybe that means, you don't just do a set of sprint intervals where each sprint is the same and you have the same rest in between. That's the traditional way to do it. And I'm guilty of, as anyone, of doing that. 5-second sprint, 1 minute recovery, and repeat that. Maybe you pattern the sprint protocol to look more like the peak period in a game. So you kind of ramp it up, and you start with 1 minute of rest, but eventually you go to only 10 seconds or 15 seconds of rest, and then you get that spike in training that looks just like the spike that you get in the game. So without measuring this goes back to, like, why is performance analysis so important? Without measuring it, you don't really know, and then you're kind of just playing follow the leader to what we all used to do before. So
there's two things here that you mentioned which are extremely very important. One is, at the end of the day, you don't need, for performance analysis, especially with the coaches that you interact with a lot and that are part of this wonderful organization, the NSCAC, is you don't need GPS, or you don't need 20 analysts crunching numbers for you to start to understand, to conduct performance analysis. You just need footage of the match, or you just need someone counting passes, some kind of insight into the match that then you can use in order to improve your performance. So that's very important to understand. We don't need GPS in order to understand. And peak periods may be a little bit advanced because you might need technology for that. But let's just go back to the basics and see what you can measure without a lot of money or technology. And that's simply the load that the players experience, the tactical organization, the team shape, which you can get from the first one. You interact with and speak with the players. The second one is just video. But going back to what you were saying about the design of training in order to improve players, I cannot stress this enough, how important it is to not put cones out there and say, okay, well, hold on a second. Johnny made a left turn and a right turn, and then he touched the ball 3 times, and then he shot. Okay, well, if we have to do that, or else we're deviating. No. The point is to understand these critical moments in which the team, based on the coach's insight and what you were saying about what the coach wants, you design it based on what they feel were moments that you weren't performing at your best. Great. But the point is that performance analysis allows you to map those moments, to give you a report card of those moments.
To quantify them, right?
To quantify them in some way. And then you're then able to design sessions that are representative of the match. And that's the concept of representative design, which means that you put your players in similar situations, for example, 4v2 overload, for example, and then you get them to solve the situation over and over again. And so now they might perform better than they did at the match, or they might have to do it a few times, but essentially that training session, which is representative of the match situation, hopefully will allow the players to experience the same kind of stimulus and adaptations that you would otherwise have gotten 10 years ago by sprinting, for example, back and forth over the net. So you have to progress with the training methodologies.
Got it. So now, I guess, we've talked about training, but before we move on from physical, of course, the topic, the title of this talk is, what can and can't be measured. So, if you don't have access to technology, I want to get to that point in a second, kind of the point of people versus technology. But if you don't have access to technology, I know I've spoken about this a lot. Anyone who's been on previous webinars that I've done or taken my courses or whatever, you can measure physical training load very, very simply. You need a measure of volume, of course, and volume is basically how much time players are running or training for in minutes. You need a measure of intensity. If you have a heart rate monitor or GPS, of course, those are more those are technological ways to measure it, and you get more accuracy, precision, etc. But if you don't have it, you can measure intensity using RPE, rating of perceived exertion, asking a player how hard was the training session on a scale from 0 to 10, with 0 being rest and 10 being maximal. And if you have that measure of volume and you have that measure of intensity from 0 to 10, you can multiply those, you can calculate training load. And I can say, even just recently with, a few years ago with the Ottawa Furies, the last, high level team that I worked with, when we used heart rate monitors and we looked at a correlation between the training load calculated with that method, volume times RPE, and the correlation between that and the training load taken from the heart rate monitors, which is the technological way, the correlations were very strong. We got almost, about 0.8 almost. So it was, it wasn't perfect, but it's not bad. Now, just before we get to the question, I know, Farzad, you said, you don't need technology, you need to start with the basics. So I kind of, I just wrote something down that I know we've talked about before. Okay, so I just want your opinion and maybe speak to the group, and then we'll get to the first question here, which is, what do you think is more important in the long run? Okay, if we're talking about performance analysis within, in these amateur, these environments that we're speaking about here, primarily amateur, club in Canada, even pro club in Canada or university in Canada, where resources are a limiting factor. What's more important? A knowledgeable person or a technology? What's better to invest in?
I think it all is related to human resources. I think the most.
I agree. Yeah, I hope you don't mind I'm leading you with that question.
It's if you have a Ferrari and no driver's license, or if you have a Ferrari and you can't drive stick, what's the point? I think the most important thing, which I've experienced with some of the fantastic coaches I worked with when I was in Canada, these coaches that may not understand the whole concept of peak periods, for example, but they trust you because they know that you have a value with our respective trainings in science and football, that you could provide insight that, you know, can help improve the games and matches without having to, for example, for the university to spend $70,000 for GPS units that they don't use. So human resources is very important, having knowledgeable people. But I think in addition to what you were saying about the physical assessment, which is so important, I think if the OPDL, for example, that's considered high performance or the competitive level, if coaches just start with just that training load methodology, RPE and time, that volume assessment that you keep talking about, and have that as the physical measure, but then just video, just record the game.
Record it,
then you can have the technical aspect, the tactical aspect of it too. When I was in Canada, I was providing these services, video match analysis using overhead view cameras for over 3 years across the OPDL, and it was of tremendous value. And you don't need sports code to code everything like what these elite people do, but the coach can sit there and just watch the match and say, oh, between the 12th minute and 34 seconds to 13 minutes and 40 seconds, this was a tactical problem. And by showing the kids essentially what's happening, there's your tactical performance analysis. And by measuring their rate of perceived exertion and the amount that they train, there you go. You have the physical component.
Yeah.
You're already so far ahead, essentially.
And you haven't spent any money on technology with those solutions, right? Yeah. So, okay. So I'm glad we're on the same page about that. I know we are. Yeah. So now I guess, you know, there are some questions here. So I want to go with, so Giovanni, he's got a couple here. I don't know if you can read them too, but I'll read them out here because I think it's a good point of discussion. First, he's saying, give an example of a representative session or activity as it relates to the dynamics of a particular portion of the game. It's a great topic, he says, and then how about training loads for different blocks of players aside from the goalkeeper? So maybe you want to speak about portions of the game, maybe Farzad, and you know, how you might go about analyzing this, let's say with video, for example. Or,
yeah. I don't know, Giovanni, but that's a fantastic question, and I think this representative design is something that my professor Bruno Travassos is working on right now and is very passionate about it. It's a topic that's very big in Portugal in terms of understanding player dynamics and ecological dynamics, how players interact with each other. And so by understanding that, it's essentially related to all these topics to understand a specific critical moment in a match. For example, a 3v2 situation where you're overloaded by the opposition. You have 2 defenders and the 3 strikers from the opposition. And so by analyzing that moment, and it's very important to understand that what I'm trying to, when I talk about designing a session, the goals and assessing the quality of the training session is dependent on the coach's insight. So it's not like there is this golden rule of 3v2 overload, this is what we do. But to, for example, take that moment where we're more vulnerable, or there's a goal scored, or we're giving an opportunity for a shot to be taken by the opposition, and to establish a situation similar to that in the training session. Now, what's interesting is if you take a pitch and if you start manipulating the dimensions of the pitch by giving players restrictions, the 2 defenders cannot cross a central line, or they cannot go further ahead, or giving them restrictive constraints, that is a representative design of that specific match situation. For them, it's like guided learning, essentially. They're trying to solve problems. And that's what we mean by essentially representative design, not necessarily, okay, so the wingers come, cross in, defend, hit it out. Okay, next, do it again. It's essentially problem solving. So I hope that kind of provides some insight to what you were asking, Giovanni.
Yeah, and I would just add to that I think, you know, the name representative design kind of implies that you're going to try to represent or match, you know, the way you want your team to play with, you know, these constrained games.
Exactly.
And so, of course, there isn't a right or a wrong way. It's literally, what does the coach want out of the team when they play games? And then you're trying to represent that in training. And the reality is that what you get when you do that, I think, you know, this is not tactical periodization, but
it's related.
It's something that the you know, coaches who use tactical periodization use, which is that then you get the exact physical load that you want the players to have when they play. You get the exact, you know, types of decision making and attacking, defending, etc. The players are on the point, in the place on the field where you want them, and so that, you know, it's very specific, right? So that's
representative
yeah.
of the match.
Literally, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So now Giovanni's second question, and actually I can see, I guess it was Kendall here that is asking about, you know, moments where a goal is scored. So I'll take on Giovanni's second question here, which is about physical loads for blocks of players. So again, you know, it depends on how you play. Like I think a little bit more of an old school way to do it without technology, and actually not just without technology, but without paying enough attention to training load, is you could make mistakes with it. For example, you might think, well, center backs don't run as much as, you know, midfielders, or, you know, fullbacks run more than, you know, than center midfielders or whatever. You don't know that. You don't know that that's true for your team unless you measure what's happening for your team. The formation you use, the strategy and tactics that you employ when you attack and defend, and of course what the opposition does, because you might go into a game thinking you're going to run, but, you know, it turns out you're just, you know, whatever, you're dominating possession, and all of a sudden nobody's getting any load at all. That's why you need to measure training load, and that's also why you need a good, valid and reliable way to measure training load and game load. And then from that, let's say you looked at, you know, a sample of 3 or 4 games, and now you're picking up on the fact that, okay, blocks of players, you know, our fullbacks and wingers on the left side maybe are doing quite a lot more than our fullbacks and wingers on the right side. Maybe that means that you're going to try to, again, represent that in training. Or maybe it's something that you don't like. You don't like the fact that too many attacks are going down the left side, and you say, okay, well, we need to train a little more on the right, so that then we increase their training load on the right and get them more accustomed to it. And you can do that. I mean, again, all of this is dependent upon what the coach wants. That's why I really like this, that we speak to coaches about this, rather than sports scientists to sports scientists, or, you know, and the best model is where a sports scientist and fitness coach is integrated with the coach. But once you've started to monitor what's happening in games, you absolutely can then look at specific training loads given to certain groups of players. Maybe it's the front 3, maybe it's the back 4 plus the number 6 defensive midfielder, whatever it is. I like that idea, but you have to start by monitoring training load, and then from that then goes to this concept, which I know we talked about, even coaches should be doing when they're using video, is once you've monitored training load, once you've captured video, once you've collected data, whatever it is, then you need a trained eye, a good, you know, knowledgeable person to identify trends. And I think the identification of trends is something that it's a bit of a skill, isn't it? It's not something that anyone can do right off the bat. And if you're not good at identifying trends, then it doesn't matter. Even if you have a $20,000, you know, GPS system, you're not going to be able to use it effectively. So I hope that answers your question, Giovanni, and maybe Farzad, just again, let's say before we move on, you know, do you want to talk to me a little bit about this concept of identifying trends? You know, do you agree with it, and how do you do it? How do you do it when you're looking at video? How do you do it when you're looking at, you know, GPS data or performance data?
Well, I think one thing that is very important is to understand that the performance analyst or the sports scientist cannot work alone. Like, I can't
in a vacuum.
Exactly. Sit there and just be like, hey, look, just get some clips or analyze a trend. No, you need the coach's ideology, their methodology, their philosophy understood, essentially, in order for you to understand what to look for. And I think this idea of trends is very coach specific because of their philosophies. So I can't really say a specific trend here or there, but what's important is this communication that needs to be established between the coach and the analyst, if you want to use such a big term for the landscape of Canadian soccer, because it's not a big term. It's just somebody who cuts those clips for you or quantifies this kinds of activities. So that's that. I hope that kind of addressed that issue. But something that Giovanni just wrote with goalkeepers, I call it a situational management, and then train accordingly. Yeah, exactly. Representative design is that. So what's different between, again, just representative and specific design is that if you are faced in a specific 3v2 situation where your goalie is threatened by a shot or a goal, is to place your players in that similar situation and give them specific constraints, and then relax and allow them to self-discover and solve that solution. And that's different than if you tell them, okay, you're going to follow this specific line and repeat the exact same thing that happened in a match. So yeah, Giovanni, exactly.
All right. So I guess I'd like to shift, we've spoken a little bit about kind of the tactical side of things and all that. And this is where I've experienced before that, maybe some coaches and fans and other people involved in the game almost think of, let's say, the use of a performance analyst, the use of performance analysis in general, and then the use of technology, that these things are kind of like binary. It's either you believe in it and you use it and you buy in, or it's like, no, you know what, I don't need that. I just, I can tell you why, this guy had a bad game, or it's like it's one or the other. Okay. I mean, obviously I don't like that approach, but that, I think that's maybe it's a problem in the sense that, it leads coaches, to maybe, to ignore something, that could help them, and again, not really realizing that there's, that's why we made the topic of this presentation, what you can and can't measure. I think we can all agree there are some things that can't be necessarily measured or quantified, but of course there are others that can. So you don't want to, throw the baby out with the bathwater. You want to say, yes, what we can measure, let's measure it. And then what we can't, okay, well then we leave that to, to coaches and their own kind of opinion and all of that. So let's talk about how you work, let's say with video in particular. I think, one of the things that's always difficult to measure is the success or failure of particular players in particular situations. Did this player make a correct decision or an incorrect decision? Did this player make a good decision or bad decision, and so on? Okay, I think, I know you do a ton of work with this, right? So how do you measure it with video? How do you measure it then, with some of the technology and the stuff you work on? And what can and can't be measured? I hope that's I didn't ramble too much there, but yeah.
No, not at all. I think it's very important what you're saying about, you have a lot of different metrics, and what's important to understand is that there is no golden metric. Soccer is multifaceted, and that's what makes it beautiful, but also a nightmare to try and compact and describe in one metric. So that's impossible. But what's important about what you were saying is that coaches need to understand and take a step towards some kind of evaluation of their performance. That's what it is. And so trying to figure out, well, what is important for me and what is feasible for me to be able to measure is very important. So this idea of what can be measured, volume can be measured, your passing rates can be measured from video, your tactical designs and your team shape can be measured with video by understanding qualitatively, but still you have some record of it. And it's very important to view performance analysis as a report card. If you went to school and you were never assessed on, for example, in certain comprehensions, then how would you know where you stand or what to improve on? More important.
It can't be fully subjective, right? It can't just be, there has to be objective truth in there somewhere.
Yeah, it was a good game, it was a bad game,
Yeah.
But what can't be, this whole idea of decision making is very important because it lies right in between this quantification and qualitative, essentially, metric. Because decision making it's not a specific metric. It's mostly about there are situations where, yes, a player makes a horrible decision, and that's very obvious, and you can use video to highlight those situations, or when a player incompletes a certain pass or gives up the ball, loses possession, gets tackled out, something. That's easy. But when you have multiple situations in which different decisions could be made, and then you're trying to rank them based on, oh, this was the best decision, second best, and the worst decision, I think that's when that's essentially the line where sports science and performance analysis has to work together with the coach and what the coach wants. And
because there's just too many variables for the human brain on its own to
exactly
to consider and remember and rank.
And it's not black or white. And so
black and white.
What's beautiful is that, yes, we can measure the number of passes complete to incomplete. You divide total completed by total passes, and then that gives you efficiency. Great. But then if you're in a certain situation of, oh, the coach decides to play. I had this amazing discussion with a coach in the top level of the Danish league, the Superliga. And we were talking about a situation where you have two strikers that are running and they're faced by two defenders. Well, where does the striker with the ball make the pass? Do they pass it through? Do they break the line? Or do they essentially pass it on the outside, essentially into space? So are you creating space and essentially understanding this? Is the ball creating space, or is the player making a run creating the space through which the ball goes to? And so, again, this kind of discussion, thank God I answered that question according to his belief. So it was fantastic. But again, it's very subjective in terms of understanding what the coach wants and how to analyze that. So
I remember, I actually remember I had a discussion with you. I don't know if you remember this. It was about 3-4 years ago when I was trying to figure out what I was gonna analyze using GPS in my PhD. And I was, of course, I wanted to measure running and acceleration and all, those things. But I was thinking, like, okay, is there a way that we can look at the position of attackers and defenders when a sprint is made and try to see, okay, how much separation was created in each sprint between the attacking player and the player trying to mark him? And is that maybe a good metric of success in running, right? Like, after a training program, hopefully you'd want, those moments where an attacker is trying to get away from a marker, you'd want them to get a little bit more separation, even if it's a yard or half a yard or whatever it is. But of course, then, I know what you told me, which, I was always worried that you were going to say this anyway, was that, well, what about the timing of the pass? What about, whether or not the player's in an offside position? What about all these other variables?
No,
you can't just isolate the physical part of the run, right?
Can't.
So anyway.
But just something important, if you are blessed by having a situation where you do have technology, one thing to understand in situations like that where you have tactical analysis, we've talked about physical analysis, but you're trying to analyze tactical decision making and understanding, is the instability that the play causes in the opposition. So similar to what you were trying to describe about the distances between the defenders, but the instability in team movement and dynamics. But now we're getting into advanced performance analysis and dynamics, because we could talk for hours, but may not be relevant at this stage.
So I thought, I don't see any more questions now, but of course I'll encourage anyone. Oh, here's Kendall again. Okay, tie it to tactical principles of play. So Kendall has asked in the chat, right? Can you tie it to tactical principles of play? And I think he means, can you tie, performance analysis to tactical principles of play? And maybe this can lead into, I'd like to speak a bit about technology, including, the specific technology that you're working on. Farzad. And so maybe let's take a shot at Kendall's question.
I think, I hope, like, tactical principles of play, if we simplify these tactical principles, if we simplify them and just say, okay, look, we're looking at when we're defensive, when we're attacking, when we have defense to attack transition, and we have attack to defense transition, and the fifth one being set pieces. Forget the set pieces. That's very easy to analyze efficiency, for example. But one thing that me and my colleague Abdul Zafar have done with some of the technologies that we're working on is trying to understand team dynamics related to tactical principles. So, for example, we took nearly 2,000 matches from the Danish Premier League, the Superliga, and we were able to measure team dynamics. And then what we did was we showed that teams that win the match have higher team dynamics, essentially movement, high intensity running speed, all that, versus teams that draw or lose. And this changes throughout the match. Beautiful, clean data. But then what we did was to relate it to Kendall's question is then we split it into, okay, so how does your team dynamics and physical capacity change going from these defensive to attack transitions and attack to defensive transitions, or when you're in a defensive phase or when you're in an attacking phase, and trying to classify energy expenditure, physical capacity in those tactical moments. And that's where essentially it ties together, where, for example, if you want to be a more attack-minded team, you have to understand, well, how many of these attacking phases do you have in a match? Well, what is the energetics of each of these phases in a match? And then try and understand how to make it more efficient so your players aren't fatigued by the 70th minute in order to perform the way you want them to perform and to get those 9, 10, 15 attacking phases. So tactical, physical relationships is extremely fascinating, and there are a lot of ways to do it. But me personally, and my colleague Abdul have done a lot of work on this, which hopefully we'll publish and post next time. But I hope that answers Kendall's question. I mean,
yeah, and I think maybe again I'll paraphrase a little bit, because I know I spoke to you before about, you know, if a coach is looking at video, and then looking at, you know, the decisions that a particular player makes, that's sort of, you know, it's a good start, because you're looking at one player at a time, and maybe small groups of players, you know, who are the 2 or 3 teammates, and maybe the 2 or 3 opponents that are close to the ball in each moment. And you can say, okay, well, you know, this player, if the one teammate made an overlapping run, you know, of a certain distance, then it was a good decision to pass, and if not, then no. So you can kind of consider first the individual, then you can consider maybe a small group of players. But then, of course, to transition from that to, because, you know, then we know when we're talking team dynamics, we're talking about the movement of 11 of your team and 11 of the opposition, and each one moving in a slightly different way over a different amount of space and at a different speed and in a different with a different timing. Each of those variables can affect whether or not the decision that was made was correct or incorrect. So it's sort of, you know, that's the point where, again, that you know, the use of software, the use of you know, a computer program, and again, you know, of course, knowledgeable people that know how to use and how to set it up properly, how to collect the data properly. That's where it comes in. I see Terrence has a hand up, so I don't know if you want to type your question, Terrence, in the chat. Or in the Q&A, or yeah.
Yeah, until Terrence asks his question, hopefully. Yeah. I just wanted to address what you were saying about how the interconnectedness of it all. And I think coaches can get overwhelmed by the amount of information. But we had a discussion about performance analysis back in last year, June, I think it was.
Yeah, it was about a year ago.
Yeah, it was a year ago. And essentially, we gave coaches an idea of, okay, well, how do you start building a monitoring platform? And I think the advice we gave last time and the discussions we're having this time is to just start with video, pick out things that are of concern to you, because even the top level coaches, we're talking about the Mourinhos, we're talking about the Pep Guardiola, they only remember and can recall up to 40% of the match. So the point is, there's a lot that you want to address. We'll address that by showing the players through video, by isolating and identifying moments that are important to you. Just measure how long your training session was and ask the athletes how exhausted they are from a scale of 1 to 10 based on the Berg scale. And that essentially builds the foundations, and hopefully, if you need consultation, you know where to find Rich and I.
That's right.
You know,
we'll do a shameless plug for our own services. But I guess I don't see, maybe Terrence hasn't gone with a question. So I got a question for you then Farzad. So I think this is something, if you know, coaches want to start getting more into, you know, analyzing video, performance analysis in general. So have you ever seen this? I'm going to just paint a picture for you, which I think is common. Okay, that, you know, we know that our own memories are not perfect. And if we don't, look at video and start quantifying performance in some way, we often don't remember everything. And so sometimes what sticks out to us, like if I had to ask you, even, you think back to the Switzerland game or whatever, one of the, what do you remember? Well, you remember the big, the moments that led to a goal, a big mistake that was made, the Spanish goalkeeper, for example, against Portugal. Like, you remember those. So those stick out to you. But when you're analyzing performance, of course, is it always best to think about those things that stick out, which might even be anomalies, and focus on them? Or is it better to look at more the consistency of a player's performance over the course of the game? Is it better to focus on a player who made one mistake, but other than that was really consistent, but that one mistake was crucial? Or is it better to focus on players that are consistently making little mistakes, but didn't happen to make a crucial mistake? What do you think about that?
So, for example, the Spain versus Croatia match, if I was analyzing the match, I would not waste my time clipping that match and say, look, Pedri, don't pass through goalkeeper.
Of course, yeah, sure.
But I think when you look at the top level and work with people in the top level, they're not concerned with the details in terms of, this person made one bad decision. I think it's the collective narrative. It's even, for example, we when we were in France together and during one of these conferences in 2017, we came across the Portuguese presentation, which was criticizing themselves. And
that's right.
They just came up from winning the Euro.
I remember commenting about that it's unbelievable how critical this was the director, the technical director of the Portuguese FA, right? And how critical he was of his own national team 1 year after they won the Euro. Yes.
But you see this at the top level where they're not concerned about, even if they win the match, if they win the tournament, they're not concerned about, did we do this and that? Did we follow the plan? Did we follow the game plan? Did we do what we wanted to do? So, for example, you get lucky in certain matches recently that give results. Yeah. But at the end of the day, I would focus on trends. How do we set up? How do we maintain our shape? How do we make those tactical principles into reality? How do we transition? What is our team organization? Do our defenders and midfielders come back and maintain shape, or do we collapse? That's more important, I think, even with the coaches that I've spoken with, rather than, for example, this player kept making mistakes. Okay, but it's 11 players essentially that you're dealing with.
Yeah. So, and again, it goes back to that idea that, first of all, identifying trends is important, and second of all, that's one of the real advantages, I guess, of a qualified, knowledgeable person, and then eventually even of technology, is that you're going to do a better job of identifying trends, and then by doing a better job of identifying trends, then you're going to you can affect your training more, and you can lead to better performance, right? So now, Giovanni, one more question. So this is okay. So when and how do you determine to implement rest segments as it relates not only to improving team dynamics, but to avoid potential chronic fatigue? So I think he means rest segments in training, sort of patterned after the data you collect. Or we're not talking about recovery days and periodization. So
no,
we're talking about within training. So you want to answer that one?
Yeah, I'll answer this, and then I think I can guess where you want to go with this. But anyways, basically, the whole point of training is not to overload your players into chronic overtraining. Yeah. But the whole concept is to be able to read your players and understand your players, and to watch them perform. So, for example, if you're doing the same session for 20 minutes straight, and the players' qualities on touching and their technical ability starts to drop, then there's something wrong. But hopefully you can catch that way before it happens. One advice that I can give you, Giovanni, is to plan your sessions related to the duration which it happened in the match, right? So it didn't happen for 15 minutes. It happened for, a few seconds, or even a minute or two. Great. Get that let that be your base starting outline of, like, okay, we're going to do this for 2.5 minutes. But you can either do it repetitively. So let's say you do 10 2-minute sessions with rests, or you could do, for example, 3 5-minute sessions, essentially. But the whole point is the coach has to understand when the quality in the player's technical performances start to drop. That's a huge sign of fatigue. But at the same time, understanding your players, and again, going back to them and asking them, look, after the first period, we do it for 5 minutes, we rest for a minute or two. How did you guys think? Rate it out of 10. Oh, was it a 6? Was it a 5? You got more fuel in you. Let's do it. If you do it again and they're like, oh, it was a 9, it was a 10, take it back, give them a few more minutes of rest, and then do the last training session for 3 minutes, for example, the last. So that comes into effect. But one thing I wanted to just say, Rich, was this goes back to the small-sided games formula of duration versus size versus,
I would just to piggyback on that is whether you're using RPE or whether you're using heart rate, you of course you want to make sure that you check, so more or less Farzad is saying you can either do kind of a very brief, very high intensity, exercises, and you do more of them, or you can do kind of a longer, and maybe the very brief exercise is just a counter attack or a 1v1 or 2v1 or something like that. And a small-sided game can be anything, but it could, if the numbers are bigger, you can play for longer. But whatever it is, there's a desired intensity that you want. So you have to check, ask the players if it's RPE, or check the heart rate response, and then right away decide, did you get the desired intensity? If you did, great. If you didn't, you either have to decrease or increase accordingly. And that's the real value of monitoring and of performance analysis, and especially of the systems, whether it's Polar or whatever it is that give you live data, because you can check these things right away. And of course, you can make decisions on the fly. Something I talk about a lot of times in my courses is, this quote, which I think it was originally attributed to a German general from the First World War, unless someone else finds someone earlier than that. But it's just that no plan survives contact with the enemy. So if you plan and you say, well, I read these books and it says that you're supposed to play 4v4 for 4 minutes and rest for 2 minutes, and that's the best way to train the aerobic system. Okay, it might be overall the best way, or they've published some studies with professional players in Italy or England that did that. But maybe in your game, you've got a really, really talented player that's hiding in the 4v4 and not running at all. And maybe you've got some other player that had a rough night last night, and the heart rate response is way higher, but it's not even because of the game, it's because of something else. So unless you monitor and check those things, you don't know. And then you're working in the dark and you're guessing. And in a high performance environment, guessing is not acceptable. So you have to plan for rest, but really more than importantly than planning, you need to check what's happening and be flexible and be ready to adjust if you don't get what you want. So
absolutely. Get to know your players. Tailor-made. Yeah.
All right. Well, you know what? It's 3 o'clock. So as I said, I did want to speak just briefly about technology before we go. And I think if you want to talk a bit more specifically about the system that you've created. So this is my question then is, you and I, we've worked with many different kinds of technology. I work as a consultant for a couple of companies, and then I have my own things that I've even made myself, and so there's some that I like. But I want you to maybe just let's say, if resources and everything, well, if money was no object, what are your top choices for performance analysis technology? And then, considering that money is an object, of course, and a factor, can you talk a little bit about what you're working on, and how can that be used? Yeah,
exactly. I don't think there's a wish list. This goes back to what we were talking about before. What suits you and your information? You have clubs out there that are, that have their own analytics department, let alone sports science department, that are spending, millions of dollars on their development. But again, what is the use for me when they have their own goals? So I'm not going to try and use what they're using. But I think that at the very least, I think you should have video and some kind of accelerometer. Now, it doesn't have to be 25 hertz GPS, but something that allows you to monitor the demands of the game in order to be able to assess, your players' performances. But even without that, let's say you have nothing. You have your training load volume assessment, you have your video, and you have your yo-yo test. That's it. That's amazing. That's all you really need when you have nothing. No budget for it. But one of the things, alluding to what, again, me and my colleague, Abdul Zafar, are doing with our company is we're coming up with this software that allows coaches to analyze their teams from a tactical perspective. So not physical. We will eventually get to that point, but by analyzing your match, you set up your team, and you're then able to use your finger as the ball. And so once you set up your team formation, you essentially take notations of who passes to who, what are the outcomes of these passes, and essentially the opposition actions as well. And so the whole point of this is that it's affordable. It brings a lot of information to coaches about player interactions. This performance analysis field of social network analysis of who is interacting with who is interacting with who, to what extent, analyzing the pass sequences, analyzing the duration, the rate of passing, understanding who your hubs or your central players are, understanding how that relationship is maintained or not maintained. But hopefully in the next few months, we'll be able to release at least a version that coaches can play with, and we can get some feedback on it. But stay tuned, and please visit the website and Instagram as well.
And again, that website is www.sportperformanceanalytics.ca.
Yes, exactly.
All
and
right,
also
it's
on Instagram, yeah.
Instagram, Sport Performance Analytics. Okay, well, as I said, it's a little bit past 3 o'clock. Everyone's got to go back to work. There's no games on today, so I guess we're actually going to go back to work now. Yeah. So, Farzad, thank you so much. As always, it's a pleasure to speak to you. And this just feels like just another discussion, like the hundreds of other times we've just talked about stuff and had a beer and all that. So let's hope we can do that again sometime in person. Thank you to everyone for watching. As always, we'll just close it off with a little request for everyone who is watching. We need your help to allow us to continue to do this with the NSCAC, to bring people like Farzad, like all the amazing guests we've had over the last couple of years now. And if you're not already a member, please have a look. I'll type the website in there where you can look into the cost of joining. It's very very low. It's only $5 a month, and then there's all kinds of discounted packages for teams and groups and clubs. On top of that, you get access to all of the videos of all of these talks. You get a library of hundreds of coach education videos, webinars, demos, free stuff, discounted stuff, courses that we teach at a discounted rate to our live conventions that we're going to start to put on again once the restrictions clear. Tell your colleagues, tell your friends in the coaching community, help us to keep doing what we're doing. Farzad, thank you again.
Yeah, thank you to the NSCAC. It's a pleasure always. Thanks to everybody who participated. Thanks for the questions. Thanks for the attendee. And thanks, Rich. Always a pleasure speaking with you.
All right. Okay, guys. Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Take care.